Thank you so much for having me. As introduced, I'm Pip, and I'm located at the DPI office in Dubbo, but have grown up most of my life in the Central West and know this area pretty well. But so I'm going to talk to you today about family resilience and some of the stuff that I learnt through my bursary project, and then some of the stuff that I'm doing now with the department. And I guess what I really want to emphasise is that communication is probably the most crucial part of your overall resilience as a family unit and as a business structure. And we spend a lot of time communicating, and we spend a lot of time with lots of words vomiting out of our mouth while we're communicating. But how often are we actually listening? We're probably doing a lot of this. There's a lot of this going on at home in our families. No, that is not a picture of your children, but it could be. But how often do we do that to one another as well? Because listening is such a crucial part of our communication. It's not just words. In my bursary project, I was looking at what are those social barriers to progress that exist in the family business that stop you from reaching your full potential. And I set off on my little journey. I knew there was a couple of big ticket items. We know that mental health's a big one, and I knew that succession planning is pretty crucial as well. And I learned about all sorts of other things that exist, not just here in Australia, but actually globally in all farming family businesses, and funnily enough, actually also in any small family business. And so that's just a capture of them, and I do workshops that cover the whole raft of the whole lot, but today I'm just focusing on the communication element because, as I said before, it's actually the most crucial piece. And if you deal with that, it will actually help resolve a lot of these other things and make them so much easier to deal with. So I ask you to think about your family business a bit like a bucket. And your business has a full potential, and just think about if you had that bucket, its full potential would be to have water to the brim, or whatever liquid, beer you choose. And you want to keep the bucket at its fullest potential. You want it full for as long as you can. Now, yes, that might get a bit tiring keeping it there, but just imagine for every people problem you have in your business, it might be a pinprick, it could be a crack if you've got a plastic bucket, or maybe your bottom of the bucket has actually rusted out completely and it's bloody hard to keep that bucket full. It takes a lot of energy, it takes a lot of resources, a lot of emotional will and turmoil goes into keeping that bucket full. So just keep that in mind. How's your bucket travelling? You know, are you at your potential, or are you having to tip in a hell of a lot more, excuse me, wardrobe malfunction, to keep your business at its potential? And on the bursary project, I went and met with lots of different farmers around the world. I met with lots of consultants around the world, trying to find out, well, what do the good businesses do? What's that difference? What do they look like? And these are the key things that I found out about the businesses. So they have meetings, and they have two types of meetings. The first type of meeting is the meeting that happens once a week to discuss operational stuff. What are we doing this week? Who's doing it? What resources do we need for it? So if we're going to mark all of the ewes or all the lambs on Friday, do we have enough ear tags? Do we have enough vaccine? Who's going to go to town and get the extra vaccine we need? Instead of, ringing up your wife while you're halfway through the pen going, oops, we've run out of vaccine, do you mind ducking to town? Like dealing with that sort of stuff. Making sure that everyone knows what's going on, putting everyone on the same table. Because if you can communicate about the small stuff, it's the pathway to start communicating about the big stuff. Those second types of meetings they have, now this varied. Some had them on a weekly basis, on a monthly basis. Some had them on like a quarterly basis, other more strategic type of meetings. And that's where you sit down around a table and start to talk about what are our financial figures doing? How are we tracking? How's that budget going? How are we travelling on our strategic plan? What challenges have we got ahead of us that we might need to readjust? Whether it's the budget, whether it's actually what we're doing, what's the environment around us telling us, what's the seasonal conditions, all of these sorts of factors, and planning forward for it. Looking at what's going on, what are the trends that the last month or quarter are showing us, what can we do about projecting ahead? It's about reaching the long-term goals. So two very distinct types of meetings. They have a clear accountability chain in the business. So people are allocated roles and they're responsible at coming back to those quarterly or monthly meetings to report against that. They are deemed as being the expert in the family business on that particular area. Now, some families it was quite different. Some just said, they were complex in terms of different commodities that they're doing. You're the livestock. It could even be your wool, your lambs, your beef, you're the cropping. Others, it was actually, you're about budget management. You're about our relationships with all the people that we have if they were value adding or dealing direct. So it's all quite different, but it's custom designed to every family. They create a rational and safe environment to discuss, and this was a really important feature, is that there is no such thing as a bad idea. And it was quite okay for anyone to put an idea on the table and that you would discuss it openly and in a rational manner. And family members felt safe. That was really important, that they could put ideas out on the table. They had processes in place to listen and communicate effectively, and that attaches very much into personal awareness. These businesses were making investment in personal growth of all of their staff members, all of the people in the business, and in some cases, even the spouses and partners of their staff members, because they recognise that if that staff member goes home and has a whopping great big fight with their partner that night, their ability to work as effectively the next day could be inhibited. And what does that cost look like to your business? Also recognising that if your staff member goes home and has a massive bitch to their spouse or partner that night, imagine what insights that spouse or partner actually has into your business and could help you map a pathway of dealing with some of those problems. So they're great insights from the people that sometimes you least expect. They had very clear goals, and one of the interesting things about the goals was that one particular family that I quite admire here in the Central West, they sit down and each person in the business puts down what are their own personal goals. What do they want from their life? What does that look like? And then mum and dad sat down and spoke about, well, what are our goals as a couple in our relationship? And then it was mapped into what's the business goals? What do we want to achieve as a business? And then how does this business environment support us as a couple in our goals and all of the members of the business in theirs? Some of them were even encouraging their spouses, partners their staff spouses or partners to do the same, and having some responsibility about how do we as a business help support them personally on their journey. It was very clear and it was very connected, nested connectors it's called, when it all sits in amongst one another, a bit like babushka dolls. They had this concept of growing a great toolbox. Now, a bit like a tradesman. If you call a tradie and he turns up with just a screwdriver and a hammer, how confident are you that he's going to deal with your problem? Unless it's hammering in a nail on a floorboard, you may not be too sure. You need to have a similar approach in your business and in your family. What are all the tools that we need in our toolbox? Across, what's our business acumen and how do we support that? What tools do we have about how we communicate? How do we deal with difficult situations when they occur? It's all about collecting information, collecting knowledge. You may not use it now, but in 10 years you might go, geez, what was that book I read and they said something? Or what was that GRDC event I went to and that crazy Neville Brady, who you hear from this afternoon, said something that I could deal with this exact point. So grow that toolbox. It enriches what opportunities you have in your business. And everyone's at the table. I heard a lot from consultants globally that said over years that they'd been dealing with certain families, that it was those that had little kids, early teenagers, inviting them to the table when they were having their strategic meetings, is that they watched those kids grow into that family business with a really different mindset. So to those children, it was just a part of their culture that you sit down and you talk about financials, you sit down and you talk about possibilities and ideas, and that you discuss them in a really harmonious, rational way, and that you resolve problems. It just becomes part of their natural culture, and then they pass that on. So bring everyone to the table. Even little kids, yes, they probably won't actually give you any great ideas, but just think about the legacy that you're creating to them. I think that's such a good point. If you are of the generation and you are frustrated by your older one, in whatever way that could look like, just focus on what culture can you create to the generation below you. It's a really good thing. What's the legacy you're going to leave? So this now leads me on to this big mass that we have sitting up here. And how do you use all of your brain to think? So I'm a practitioner of the Herman's Brain Dominance Instrument. Its nickname is HBDI, and I'm going to talk you through a little bit what it's about. But what I want you to understand is that we have this unique thing in our head, which we don't use to its full capacity, and we have it as a great gift in our businesses and in our families, and we can use it to become really great communicators and help to achieve better outcomes for ourselves, for those that we're communicating with. Then I'm going to talk you through a couple of strategies on how to deal with difficult situations that you may come into. So, Ned Herman, who developed the whole brain thinking instrument, was he was an engineer with General Motors, and when he retired, he decided to look into the brain. He wanted to better understand, what does it do? Why am I the person I am? Can I change? All those sort of questions that sometimes we might ponder. So he set off, and what he learnt was that we have a left and a right side of our brain. Now we all know that, that's fact. You can take a brain and you can see it and you dissect it. But they have different functions. So the left side of the brain is the very logical and the very rational side of our brain, and it operates in numbers and it looks for patterns. The right side of our brain is where we're far more holistic and synthesising, and it goes a lot more on intuition, gut feel. It loves colours. You know, it's very imaginative. Okay, so you went, right, we've got the left and the right, that's easy. Then he found out this thing called the triune brain. Now this is science, I haven't made any of this up. And within our brain we have a couple of major components. So we've all probably heard of the reptilian brain. Now this is where our basic flight and fight instinct comes from. It's very primal. Every species with a brain has this part of it within their own brain. But we don't actually use that to think, okay? So he drew his attention to these two parts, the limbic brain and the neocortex, or the cerebral brain as we call it in Australia. But the limbic brain, which he's sort of said, okay, well, I'm going to look at that as the lower part of the brain because it sits underneath the neocortex. That's where we have a real emotional and our feeling type of our brain. Now, it's an older part of the brain as opposed to the neocortex. The neocortex is what makes human beings extremely unique compared to other mammal species. So the neocortex is where we have that much higher order thinking. So it's often referred to as the intellectual part of our brain. So Ned went, okay, so we've got left and right, and we've got upper and lower. Very simple. Okay, so he said, well, I'm going to turn it into a framework for thinking because we know that they do different functions. And this is what he turned it into. Very simple. Sorry, is there anyone in the room that is colourblind? I should just ask that. Okay. The reason I'll do that is that I'll talk in A, B, C, D rather than colours. Okay? So he said, okay, well, we've got these four parts of our brain, four quadrants, if we take the left and the right, the upper and the lower, and they have distinct functions. So the A part of the brain, which is the upper part, the cerebral brain, on the left side of the sphere. And this is where we have particularly those logical and that quantitative type thinking. This is the numbers, this is the data part of our brain. The lower, like that limbic on the left sphere, this is about sequence and planning. It's very orderly. And they call this, that lower part of the brain, the safekeeping part of our brain, because it's about process. If we have things that are routine, if they're in a sequence, it's safe. It's predictable. And then if we cross to the right part of the brain, the C quadrant, which is that lower part of the brain on the right, is very much about that interpersonal. It's about how we feel. It's very intuitive to other individuals. All of those interpersonal skills that we have. And then the D quadrant, which is the upper part of the brain on the right, this is where we really start to get into the big picture thinking. This is where it is looking for connections and it synthesises information. So what he found was that we actually have a preference in how we use our four quadrants. So I want you to do a little activity. Just put everything out of your hands, and I want you to put your arms down by the side and give them a good shake. Get the blood flowing. Now I want you to cross your arms over your chest. This is very rigorous science, this one. Okay, now put them back down your side, give them another shake. And this time I want you to do it, but cross your arms the other way. How are we going? Who's not even sure if their arms are even crossed the other way? Yes. Yeah. Now, who did it quickly? Who had no problem crossing their arms the other way? Okay, a couple of people. Who felt like it was some awful experiment and that you're on show to a zoo? Yep. And other people still haven't worked out if they've even crossed their arms the other way. So it's about preference. It's a really great example of preference. Our preference is to do it that way. Now, to do it the other way, a big majority of this room had to really think about it. I'd do this and then I go like that. I think I've done it, you know? So we had to think about it. But what would happen if we practiced? It'd become a lot easier, wouldn't it? I'd get better at it, that I wouldn't actually have to think about it. So that's about preference, and we are exactly the same in our brain. We have a preference in in which order we move across these quadrants. So there is no good or bad, there's no right or wrong, it just is. But if we're aware of how we have a preference, then we can become better communicators, because our thinking influences how we communicate, also can sometimes influence our behaviour. So we can have extreme preferences for certain quadrants. Now, just to give you some extreme examples, actually I'll wait to do that. Here, I'll do it in this part. So this is looking a little bit deeper at each quadrant, okay? So what I want you to really pay attention to in each of the quadrants are things like this. What's important to them about decision making? What's important to them about problem solving? Because in the farming community, we do a lot of that. You guys spend a huge amount of time being problem solvers and decision makers. And as I said, if you have a strong preference for a particular quadrant, it is going to really be very obvious and evident and could make you really difficult to work with for others that don't have a strong preference in that quadrant. So just to give you an example of someone that would have an extreme preference in this quadrant is the sort of person, now no finger pointing, if you want to raise your hand just so everyone knows that you're one of those, by all means feel welcome to do it. But I just want to give you some extreme examples just to help emphasise these quadrants. This person could be, when you go to that individual to say, I've got a new idea, and what they actually expect of you is the entire book of proof. They will want every single possible fact, data, chart, graph, scientific evidence to back up that idea. Now, you may have come across some of those every now and then. Bank manager could be one. Book of proof. This other quadrant, that lower quadrant on the left-hand side. So again, have a look at decision making and problem solving. I don't need to read them out for you because I'm sure you can all read. An extreme person in this quadrant could be someone that has their pantry in alphabetical order. It could be someone who has a colour coding system for the pegs on the clothesline, and that each quadrant of the clothesline is allocated to particular family members. I know plenty of those. I have a friend that rang me in a panic. She had done her profile, she knew she was extreme green. Rang me in a panic, she just found out she was pregnant with her third child. Was fine about the whole, like everything about birth, how am I going to manage 3 little children, but couldn't cope with the fact that their clothesline only had 4 quadrants and there was going to be 5 members of the family. That's what spun her out. She couldn't cope because of that. If we go to the red quadrant, or the C quadrant, which is the lower right part of the brain, these guys, an extreme example would be, this person goes away on a work trip and they take photos of the family. They might even take like something from the house just so that they feel like they're at home while they're away. Or these are the people that will be very touchy-feely when you see them. They come up and they hold you on the arm and they might drape themselves on you. How are you? How is everyone? Are you doing okay? You know, they're very connected in their language towards you. And for a lot of you, that will make you feel really uncomfortable. They're invading your private space, but they are so connected, they're so interpersonal. And then we go up to our top right quadrant. Again, these are our big experimental folk. So an extreme case would be those people in your community groups who come up with those extraordinarily weird and wacky ideas. You know, the ones that are going to save parks for the rest of its life, they're going to make more money. Bet you whoever came up with Elvis Festival was probably extremely strong in yellow. Like imagine, I don't know how long the Elvis Festival's been going on here, but could you imagine the first time someone said, let's have an Elvis Festival in parks? Like, imagine the response initially. People would have gone, what are you thinking? Okay, so these are those big, weird, wacky people. Great idea thinkers, okay? So as I said, we have a preference in how we use each one of these. So in terms of communication, how we see each of these quadrants, these people are going to want different things from us. So as I said, we have a preference. Now what we know is that some people can be extreme in certain quadrants, but we also know that some people can have next to none of other quadrants. What you can also have is the ability to be really nimble across all four, or you can have, one, two, or three dominances across quadrants. So we can do all of them, but if you have a very low score in a particular quadrant, then that means you find it really difficult to be in that quadrant. Now, I've got a couple who live west of here, and when they did their profile, she found out she was extreme, off the scale red, or C, sorry. Her husband was off the scale A, and when I was talking to them, she was saying, like, things have all of a sudden, like this was during the drought, things would sort of get tough, she'd break into tears, she'd be standing there going, David, I need to talk to you, you have to listen to me. And he was just going, I'm out of here. And he'd beeline to the shed, and that's where he'd stay for the next 5 hours. And he was going, I'm not dealing with that. Meanwhile, what do you think she was doing inside? Not pretty. Anyway, when they did their profile, what they realised was, poor David went, oh dear. Now what Danielle says, she goes, David, I need you to be red. And he stands here and goes, I'm being red, I'm being red, I'm being red, I'm being red. But she gets what she needs. His presence is there, and she recognises that he's stepping way out of his comfort zone, just to be present, because she knows normally he would beeline to that shed. And all he has to do is stand there going, I'm being red, I'm being red, I'm being red, I'm being red. And she gets it, and everyone, is sort of happy, sort of. So we can have extremes, and what happens when we don't move across into other quadrants that people might need from us is that you get that good example. David goes to the shed, she sits there crying, feels unloved, disrespected, and he's going, I don't know what the hell went on back there, but whoa, get me out of here. Okay? So be really aware of how do we communicate from each of these quadrants. Can I be nimble across all four quadrants? There was a great question asked before in Natasha's session around using profiling to match employers or employees into your business. One of the most important things about this is about the diversity of thought. So if you had to make a decision in your business, if you had a cluster, if you all thought the same, and just say, even if you had a dominance towards the left side of the brain, look at all of the things that you miss out from the right sphere of the brain. The risk of groupthink. Groupthink doesn't actually help us. Groupthink takes away all the possibilities, takes away all sorts of things. So it's really good to look at how do we sit as a family, or how am I as an individual, how are we as a family? What might the people that support around us look like as well? We know that bank managers, we know that accountants, some families, they're lawyers, have a huge influence in your life. Even consultants, what might they look like? Are we making sure that we cross all of these parts of our business, to make us a better business unit, a better thinking unit? As I said, communication is really important. There are terms that these quadrants won't like. And the more extreme someone is in a quadrant, the far more careful you have to be about the language you use. You can upset people with just a simple word. Your intent and how they perceive it can be two very, very different things. What comes out of here is different to what goes in there on the other person. Getting people on board for change. So we do a lot of this in our families. We have change that comes at us from all sorts of perspectives. We have changes that we decide to make, and then there's the other changes. I often talk about there's the big D's that we have to deal with. There's death, disability, divorce, drought, daughter-in-laws, daughters. There's all sorts of things, dirty boys. There's all sorts of things I've got sons. There's all sorts of things that happen to us that we can either choose to or that we just have to adapt to. So how do we approach how does each quadrant do this? How does it, it's a process in terms of dealing with that change? How do we encourage others to think about it? Really important stuff. So if you need to talk to your family about a change that you think needs to be made, or if you've just had an enforced change on you, a really good process is to sit down and go through all these 4 quadrants before you even go to the bank, before you even go to the other family members. Work through the 4 quadrants. What might this need to look like to make me a whole of brain thinker? There's generational differences. Now this has come from Isabel Knight from Proactive, who's a big succession facilitator. This is a collection of a lot of her insights plus science that's out there available in the marketplace. But I think it's really interesting about the generational differences that we have and how each generation sees the world. Now this does not include millennials because we're still studying that age group, but you'll see here some really important parts. I think outlook and work ethic. Look at the differences that we see there. View of authority. I think this is a really interesting one in our businesses. When you've got young people interacting with, even if you've got multiple generations involved in your business, how different that looks. We have in agriculture traditionally a very hierarchical model that we seem to expect. Now, our younger people, not just saying millennials, our X's and our Y's, see a very different world in terms of leadership. Will be very nimble across moving between jobs and careers in their lifespan and aren't as worried by that, whereas older generations are. Let's have a look at relationships, training, communication at work. I think this is a really interesting aspect about training in terms of in your business. I read an article last week that was talking about young people now, when they're reading through job adverts, it's not necessarily about what they'll have to do, but more about what opportunities you're going to offer for their leadership, for their personal development. They want to know what else they're going to gain that leverages them in their career. So you might want to think about in your context, we'll take you to field days, we'll give you learning opportunities, we'll encourage you to do courses, we'll encourage you to go and network, build those opportunities, take on leadership opportunities in local community groups or leadership programs offered by industry bodies. Sell yourself on that stuff. It's called soft system skills and they're hungry for it. Young people want it, and as you'll see right there, they think it's their right and it's necessary and expected. I love that. I love that part of my life, and I think I love what I do because I get to do so much that adds value and riches to my life in terms of my leadership, in terms of my own personal awareness. There's a lot of other people out there just like me. It's 5 minutes to go. I thought you were saying, that's me too. Probably is, Di. Okay, so difficult conversations. There's a couple of techniques I'm going to share with you to use. There's word crafting, inoculation, consensus, and also how to be assertive, but in a nice way. Word crafting. This is really important. As I said, the words you use will have so much impact, and if there's anything that I'd like you to take away, it's this. It's not difficult. Shift to using could and would sentences. Not should, but could and would. Combine it with we and us, not I, me, you. And you can use things like, and how can we? And the reason why this is important is if someone comes to you with an issue and you go, okay, how could we make this a better outcome for both of us? If someone's just come to you and they're very disgruntled, how could we make this a better outcome for both of us? Such a better question than saying, well, what are you going to do about it? Or that's not my problem. So find language that has quite a neutral territory. And using we and us, even though you might think that that's not your problem to deal with, if you say we and us, it's very inclusive and it makes someone feel like, okay, you're not going to put up a big wall to me. There's not a huge barrier. You're actually prepared to look at this with me, okay? And could and would, if you think about the difference of those two words to should almost comes with has a finger pointing with it. So could and would. Most important, my supervisor, she learnt this little technique a long time ago, which is and how can we? Whenever I go to her with an idea, she never says to me, nope, We don't have the budget for it. That's stupid, Pip. No, I never get that. She always goes to me, okay, and how can we make that a better idea so that you could pitch that forward for investment? You know, even if it's got gaps in it, how can we? Okay, your language is crucial. Inoculation, this is the concept of pre-warning someone you're about to deliver them bad news, or that you need to have a difficult conversation with them. The really interesting thing is that we will stew ourselves up over having to have that difficult conversation. Who's gone through that process before? Yeah, could be with your kids, spouse, the bank manager, anyone. You stew yourself up going, oh, I don't want to do this. I just would much prefer to bury my head in the sand. Okay, so you get yourself ready to have it, but the other person, they may not be ready. Okay, so what this is about is that you'll approach the person, so I'll use Di as my guinea pig, and you come, Di, I need to talk to you about something that's going to be quite difficult. I'm worried that it could hurt your feelings, but I want you to know it's not going, like that's not my intention. Can we talk about it now? And Di might go, shit.
Pretty much.
Shit. No, I'm busy right now. And you go, okay, but could we make a time to talk about it soon? And Di might go, well, look, I'm free tomorrow. Could we talk about it then? And you go, thank you so much. I really appreciate that you'll let us have this discussion. Okay, so Di, for the next 24 hours, will be shitting her pants about what it potentially could be, and we'll come up with a million different assumptions. But she knows that I'm about to have a difficult conversation with her, and I've positioned that I know her feelings could be hurt, but it's not my intention. Okay, so that's called inoculation, letting someone know. And there's so many different ways that if you wanted just to Google inoculation conversations, you'll find stuff that give you all sorts of different examples about how you can do it. And it might just be saying, look, do you want me to be soft and fluffy with you, or do you want me just to cut to the chase? And so that person gets to decide, well, cut to the chase, I guess, not soft and fluffy. Okay, so there's lots of different techniques to inoculate, but it's about being hard on the issue, soft on the person, letting them know this is what's coming. Assertiveness. Now, assertiveness is often seen as those horrible bullies that get their own way, but true assertiveness is about here. It's being in the middle, where you're both protected. So it's passive is where you step on me, and aggressive is where I just step on you to get my own way. So we have to find this space in the middle, and there's some language to use around how to do that. So there's 3 little steps to it. The first part is saying to someone, when you die, when you yell at me in the cattle yards, okay, so when you said what it is, it makes me feel, so that's the important words, it makes me feel like you really disrespect me and you have no value for the fact that I've just left the scones in the oven to come out here and help you. Okay, so I've said how it makes me feel. No one can ever argue with how you feel. And then you say, I would prefer it if you spoke to me in a calm manner, and if we're having a problem, you know, accept that we will get through this. Okay, so when it makes me feel, I would prefer if. Okay, it's really important that instead of having a dummy spit, ranting and raving, that you actually acknowledge what the issue is, how it's making you feel, and what you would prefer. Give that person the solution that you actually want, because we do so much to other people where we seem to somehow expect that they will telepathically work out what the hell it is that we want. Okay, and unfortunately, I haven't met anyone yet that can read someone's mind. I know Hugh said this morning we probably will be able to in the future, but that's not the reality today. Building consensus. Now, this is a strategy for when things have probably gotten to a pretty poor situation. This is a really good process for families that have, hit the wall when they're doing succession planning, and this is probably something that you need to bring in an external person to help you with. So what you do is those that want to participate in the process. Now, when I was in the US, I met a bloke called Jeff Gabel, and he specialises in consensus, and he said, and I was talking about, well, what happens though when you've got all the other family members that don't want to come and participate in succession? And he said, Pip, you can only ever dance with who comes to the ball. And I thought, well, you're right. And he said, and think about, why aren't people at the ball? Is it that they've come before and they, someone wouldn't dance with them on the floor and they felt really embarrassed so they can't come back? Did they trip? Did they not have a good time. You know, think about why mightn't they be there and be understanding of that. But what you do is you get each person to actually say what's their present and how are they feeling about it. Now they do that one-on-one with the person. Okay, so it lets them vent out. Then you get, as a collective, you do what's the worst case scenario if we don't actually address this, and go for it. You know, that our family hates each other, and for the next 5 generations we have nothing to do with each other, everything's liquidated, there's debt, you know, just go for it. You know, someone dies because they had a heart attack because of the stress. You know, put the worst case scenario out there, and then you shift it. Okay, well, what's the best case scenario that, you know, if we resolve this, what does it look like? And then you end on, well, what are the beliefs, the behaviours, the processes that we need to change to actually achieve that and avoid that? And it puts people in perspective, and it's a great way to then get to consensus. It won't actually deal with your succession plan because you've got some communication issues that are going to need to be resolved first. It's about acknowledging what that is for each person, but then getting to hear about people taking some ownership about what it is that they might have to change. So in summary, as I said, be aware of your own thinking preference and what implications that might have for the way that you communicate with others, but about how can you become a better communicator because you're aware of what your tendencies tend to be. Use your whole brain thinking capacity. It's there, it's a gift. Adapt to others, ask the right questions, use those right keywords, and increase that communication toolbox. Get out there and be hungry. Google's a great gift now. There is so much out there that you can just Google. You don't have to read books. You don't have to go and do week-long courses. Just Google it and listen well. Listen for what's being said to you. And what listening is that we often wait for someone to take a breath when they're talking to us so that we can then just jump in and throw our 2 bobs worth in. Just stop. When someone takes a breath, allow them to have it, allow them to keep speaking, and then when it feels like you've gotten to that right point, then say, okay, thanks, Di. What I actually heard you say is this, and paraphrase it to them and saying, thank you for sharing that with me. And that person will go, oh my goodness, they've just validated me. They actually heard what I said. You know, so that's a really important part of listening. So I'll leave it on that. I'm happy to take questions or discuss stuff in lunchtime, or if you need stories, I can always tell stories too.